Section 4, Economic Recovery Sparks Change. The focus question is, how did changes in agricultural trade lead to a growth of towns and commerce? And commerce is just like business. By the end of this section, what you should be able to do is summarize how new technologies sparked an agricultural revolution, explain how the revival of trade changed commerce and led to the growth of towns, analyze the rise of the middle class and the growth of guilds, and describe life in medieval towns and cities. On page 231, there's a witness to history about learning trades, and that's kind of interesting to kind of read through and just see the agreement and the promises that both the apprentice and the person who's taking on the apprentice, what the deal or the contract is. But if we start with this, an agricultural revolution, why did agricultural production improve? Technology plays a huge role in this. First of all, you've got iron plows, and these iron plows are able to carve deeper and get into the richer soil. And there's also a climate change that's taking place. It's warming up a bit, and so places like Rome that used to be able to produce a lot of food, it's getting warmer and drier, and the wetter, more fertile soils of Northern Europe are ripe for the picking, and so they're starting to dry out a little bit. The climate's starting to become a bit more temperate, and so they're able to plow in there. And so these iron plows are necessary to be able to get into this soil that had never really been tilled before. The other big improvement is a new harness. The harness that they had before really only worked with oxen. If you put it on a horse, the horse would pull so hard and it was right at their windpipe, and they would have a hard time breathing. So once they develop a new harness, they're able to use horses. And horses are able to plow 2 times the amount of land, which means that there's more land that you can do. Whereas before with a team of oxen, you could maybe only do 20 acres. Now with horses, you can do 40 acres. So you're doubling the amount of land that you're planting. So because of this, what you see going on throughout Europe is the clearing of forests, the draining of swamps, and the reclaiming of wastelands. These lands that maybe once upon a time were used for farms, and then with the fall of Rome were abandoned, they're reclaiming them, and so there's a lot more land available. Another thing that changes is they went from a 2-field system to a 3-field system. In a 2-field system, if you had 600 acres, you would plant 300 acres in wheat or rye, and you leave the other 300 acres fallow, meaning you didn't do anything with it. And the idea is it would recover and regain some of the nutrients that have been lost. The next year, you plant the fallow field, and your planted field lays fallow. In a 3-field system, if you take that same 600 acres, you put 200 acres in wheat or rye, you put another 200 acres in barley, oats, or lentils. These are legumes, peas and beans. They're high in protein, but because they're legumes, they also replace nitrogen into the soil or put nitrogen into the soil, and so it's recharging the soil. And then you would have 200 acres lay fallow, and then you would just rotate your fields, and you would follow the beans and barley and lentils with rye or wheat, because that soil would be richer and recharged, and then you would put the barley, peas, and oats on the fallow field, and you just kind of keep rotating. But instead of just planting 300 acres, now you're planting 400 acres. So all of these things mean more land, means more food, and the population is going to triple in just over or just under 300 years. So the farming means more food, means more people. If you have more people, then we're also going to get the towns. So the revival in trade and travel. At the same time that this is happening with the farms, you see less wars and foreign invasions. As things are warming up and getting better, the Vikings are no longer raiding like they were. The Huns, they're kind of settling down. And so it's a lot safer for travel. You get crusaders who are bringing goods back from the Middle East that people want. And you have all of these people who want different things. Nobles want these goodies, the expensive things, but peasants want iron. They want iron plows. They want to be able to have these iron tools that are harder, they're cheaper, and now that you have trade popping back up again, they have access to them. All of this is going to lead to trade routes expanding. They're going to follow a lot of the old trade routes and a lot of the old roads, that had been built by the Romans are going to be reclaimed again. Some of the popular places are Constantinople, which was the Byzantium at one point in time, and remember Constantine reclaimed it, made it a capital city. Constantinople is, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, is a major trade city. Also Venice and Flanders. So Flanders is a region up in northern Europe by France and Belgium. It's kind of an interesting ethnic and cultural region. It's a mixture of French and Belgium and Netherlands. It's a very rich culture. But Flanders has a major trade cities, as does Venice. So this northern Italy to Flanders is kind of this major trade route, north and south. And Constantinople to Venice is kind of the east and west one. But with trade expanding, also towns are going to grow. So slowly cities are going to be re-emerging. And the biggest are, again, northern Italy and Flanders. One of the things that happens is you start to see charters forming. This is an agreement between a town and a lord. These towns are outside of the feudal system and outside the manor system, so they really didn't fit into the political and economic system of the day. And so because they're outside of feudalism, lords have to figure out a way to include towns which are on their lands but not part of the system. And it's interesting that one of the sayings at the time is town air makes you free. If you're a serf and you live in town for a year and a day, you're no longer a serf. So what you see is these manors are becoming overpopulated due to this increase in food. And a lot of times these lords would just let serfs leave. They just didn't need that much labor anymore. And so these serfs are moving into towns. So besides an agricultural revolution, there's also a commercial revolution. And there's three key changes that lead to this commercial revolution. With the increase of trade, there's a need to go back to using money again. Before that, you really didn't need it. You could barter it. So you need this capital, this money, this wealth, and that's going to stimulate the growth of banking. And banking is going to lead to the beginnings of modern business. Partnerships are a good way to start these businesses because you can pool your funds. And pooling your funds does a couple of things. One is it means that you can have more capital or more money. Because if you have 100 people investing in a company, you can raise a lot more money than if you have 2 people. The other thing it does is it reduces the risk for each person. If that company goes under, you only lose 1/100th of your investment. Whereas if you are the only investor, you lose everything. You start to see a system of insurance beginning at this time and the use of credit. So you're going to start to borrow money to be able to invest, and you need a system of insurance to be able to make sure that you offset any losses that you have. Trade, towns, population growth, use of money, these things all erode the feudal system. So the system that developed just to kind of get through this period when Rome fell, Europe is moving into more modern times, and so over the course of several centuries, feudalism is just going to kind of fade away. The middle class are another group that are outside of feudalism. Really, in the feudalistic system, you're either a peasant or a lord. There really isn't a whole lot in between. You've got priests and I guess knights. Knights would be the closest thing to a middle class, but I mean, not really.
We represent the Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop Guild, and in the name of the Lollipop Guild, we wish to welcome you to Munchkin Land.
Merchant guilds and artisan guilds. Merchant guilds are business type guilds. They would be like people who milled grain and turned it into flour. Artisan guilds are those skilled workers that make things with their hands. And these guilds cooperated to protect their interests. They did a couple of things. They regulated quality and they regulated price. So these guilds would decide how much to make. They would decide the standards. So if you went and bought a loaf of bread anywhere in a town, that loaf of bread would be the same. Same weight, same ingredients, same everything, same price. And it also served the purpose of social services. So if someone got hurt on the job, they would help the guild member's family out until they were back and healthy again. If someone died, the guild would help take care of that person's family. So it did lots of things outside of that. To become a guild member, you'd have to, at the age of 7 or 8, become an apprentice. Basically, you would be there for 7 years learning the trade. At some point, you could become a journeyman, which was a salaried worker. So what you'd have to do is, after 7 years of learning a trade, you would have to make a masterpiece. So if you were a bread baker, you'd have to make a master loaf of bread. And once you could do that, you could go out and become a journeyman, and that means you could earn your own business and make your own money. Very few people would go on to become guild masters. These are the people who do this better than anyone else. And then that's kind of the next layer up, where you basically become the best at whatever it is that you do. There are a few women guilds or female guilds, not a whole lot, but women are pretty active in these guilds, and they dominated certain ones, like, for example, maybe tailors or guilds who washed clothes for a living. So, I mean, there are a few that do that. So what were these medieval cities like? They had high protective walls to keep invaders out and to protect the people who lived there. Houses, towns, streets are kind of thrown together haphazardly. These towns grew so quickly, there isn't a whole lot of planning. It also is very dirty, messy. There's a lot of human waste in the streets. It's a place that's ripe for disease and infections. The thing that would dominate the landscape are these great cathedrals. And these cathedrals, each town kind of took pride in building the biggest and best cathedral. Notice as you walk towards